Her life, once defined by duty and tradition, took a dramatic turn when she met Ryan Calloway, a young expatriate who offered her a glimpse of freedom she had never known. But their secret relationship would ignite a chain of events that no one could have foreseen, leading to a shocking and heartbreaking conclusion. Stay with us as we explore the life of Amina, the choices that led to her untimely end, and the aftermath that left a community reeling. If you're captivated by stories of love, betrayal, and justice, make sure to like, subscribe to True Crime Stories Arena, and share this video. Let's begin. Amina Al-Farouqi was born into a family that valued tradition and honor above all else. Growing up in Sharjah, a quieter emirate compared to the bustling city of Dubai, Amina's childhood was shaped by the expectations of her conservative upbringing. Her father, a respected businessman, and her mother, a devoted homemaker, instilled in her the importance of family, faith, and duty. As the eldest daughter, Amina was often reminded that her actions reflected not just on herself but on her entire family. From a young age, Amina was taught to prioritize her family's reputation. Her education, social interactions, and even her hobbies were carefully monitored to ensure she adhered to the values her parents held dear. While her peers in more liberal households enjoyed greater freedom, Amina's life was one of structure and discipline. She excelled academically and was admired for her grace and modesty, qualities that made her a source of pride for her family. At the age of 22, Amina's life took a significant turn when she was introduced to Khalid Al-Mansour, a wealthy businessman from Dubai. Khalid, 15 years her senior, was a man of influence and status. Their marriage was arranged by their families, a union that was seen as mutually beneficial. For Amina's parents, Khalid represented security and prestige. For Khalid, Amina was the ideal wife, beautiful, obedient, and deeply rooted in tradition. Their wedding was a grand affair, attended by hundreds of guests from across the region. Amina, dressed in an intricately embroidered gown, looked every bit the perfect bride. But beneath her composed exterior, she felt a sense of unease. While she respected Khalid and was grateful for the life he could provide, she did not feel the connection she had always hoped for in a partner. Still, she accepted her role as his wife, determined to fulfill her duties and make the marriage work. Life with Khalid was luxurious but lonely. Their home in Emirates Hills, one of Dubai's most exclusive neighborhoods, was a sprawling villa with every modern convenience. Amina wanted for nothing in terms of material wealth, but emotionally, she felt isolated. Khalid was a man of few words, focused on his business ventures and social obligations. He expected Amina to manage the household, attend social events, and present herself as the perfect wife. There was little room for her own desires or aspirations. Over time, Amina began to feel the weight of her circumstances. She longed for companionship, for someone who would see her as more than just a wife or a symbol of family honor. She found solace in small acts of independence, reading novels, taking long walks in the garden, and eventually, joining a private women's gym. It was at this gym that Amina's life would change forever. The gym was a space where Amina could escape the confines of her home and interact with other women. It was here that she met Ryan Calloway, a fitness trainer who had recently moved to Dubai. Ryan was young, energetic, and full of life, a stark contrast to the reserved and traditional world Amina had always known. Their initial interactions were brief and professional, but over time, they began to talk more. Ryan's easygoing nature and genuine interest in her life made Amina feel seen in a way she never had before. For Amina, these moments at the gym became the highlight of her day. She found herself looking forward to her sessions, not just for the exercise but for the chance to talk to Ryan. She knew the risks of forming a connection with him, but she couldn't help herself. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of happiness, a glimmer of something she couldn't quite define. But as Amina's feelings for Ryan grew, so did the complexity of her situation. She was acutely aware of the boundaries she was crossing, the expectations she was defying. Yet, in her heart, she couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward him. It was a dangerous path, one that would lead to consequences far beyond anything she could have imagined. Amina's connection with Ryan Calloway began innocently enough. Their conversations at the gym were lighthearted and casual, often revolving around fitness tips or harmless anecdotes about life in Dubai. But as the weeks turned into months, their interactions grew more personal. Ryan, with his open and friendly demeanor, began asking Amina about her life outside the gym. At first, she was hesitant to share much, but his genuine interest and lack of judgment made her feel comfortable in a way she hadn't experienced before. Ryan was unlike anyone Amina had ever known. He was young, carefree, and unburdened by the rigid expectations that defined her world. He spoke openly about his dreams, his struggles, and his experiences as an expatriate in a foreign land. For Amina, who had spent her entire life adhering to strict cultural norms, Ryan's perspective was refreshing and intriguing. She found herself drawn to his optimism and the sense of freedom he seemed to embody. Their relationship began to shift subtly. Amina started staying longer after her workouts, finding excuses to linger and talk to Ryan. She began to share more about her own life, her childhood, her marriage, and the loneliness she felt despite her privileged lifestyle. Ryan listened without judgment, offering her a sense of understanding and validation that she had never received from Khalid. For Amina, these moments with Ryan became a lifeline, a brief escape from the confines of her reality. It wasn't long before their connection deepened. One evening, after a particularly emotional conversation, Ryan suggested they meet outside the gym. Amina hesitated, knowing the risks involved, but the longing for companionship outweighed her fear. They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe in a less conspicuous part of the city. That first meeting outside the gym marked the beginning of their affair. Their relationship quickly became a whirlwind of stolen moments and secret rendezvous. They met in secluded locations, exchanged messages on encrypted apps, and even spent time together in Ryan's modest apartment. Amina felt a sense of liberation she had never known, a chance to explore a side of herself that had been suppressed for so long. With Ryan, she could laugh, dream, and be herself without fear of judgment or expectation. But as their affair intensified, so did the risks. Amina knew she was walking a dangerous line. In her culture, a woman's honor is deeply tied to her family's reputation, and any hint of impropriety could have devastating consequences. She took every precaution to keep her relationship with Ryan a secret, lying to Khalid about her whereabouts and deleting any evidence of their communication. Yet, despite her efforts, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Unbeknownst to Amina, Khalid had grown suspicious of her behavior. He noticed the changes in her routine, the way she seemed distracted and distant at home. Amina's newfound interest in fitness, which had initially pleased him, now seemed like a convenient excuse for her frequent absences. Khalid's suspicions were further fueled by whispers from acquaintances who had seen Amina in places she had no reason to be. Khalid's pride and sense of control would not allow him to ignore these signs. He decided to take matters into his own hands, hiring a private investigator to follow Amina and uncover the truth. Within weeks, the investigator had gathered enough evidence to confirm Khalid's worst fears. Photos of Amina and Ryan together, screenshots of their messages, and even a video of them entering Ryan's apartment painted a damning picture. For Khalid, this was more than a personal betrayal, it was a public humiliation. In his eyes, Amina's actions had brought shame upon their family, tarnishing the reputation he had worked so hard to build. The weight of this perceived dishonor consumed him, and he began to see Amina's affair not just as a betrayal of their marriage but as an affront to his very identity. Meanwhile, Amina remained unaware of the storm brewing around her. She continued to see Ryan, cherishing the moments they shared and the sense of freedom he gave her. But the pressure of living a double life began to take its toll. She was constantly on edge, fearing that her secret would be discovered. The guilt of deceiving Khalid and the knowledge of what her actions could mean for her family weighed heavily on her. Ryan, too, began to feel the strain of their relationship. While he cared deeply for Amina, he was increasingly aware of the risks they were taking. He didn't fully understand the cultural and societal implications of their affair, but he knew enough to realize that their love came with consequences. Despite his concerns, he couldn't bring himself to end the relationship. He was in too deep, and so was Amina. As the weeks went on, the tension in Amina's life became unbearable. She knew she couldn't continue living this way, torn between her duty to her family and her love for Ryan. She began to consider the possibility of leaving Khalid, a thought that terrified her but also filled her with a sense of hope. She dreamed of a life where she could be with Ryan openly, free from the constraints of her marriage and the expectations of her culture. But Amina's dreams were not to be. Khalid, armed with the evidence of her affair, was preparing to confront her. For him, this was not just a matter of personal betrayal, it was a question of honor, one that demanded a response. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change all their lives forever. The day Khalid decided to confront Amina was one she would never forget. For weeks, he had been quietly gathering evidence, his anger simmering beneath a calm exterior. To Amina, he seemed as distant as ever, preoccupied with his business and social obligations. She had no idea that he was carefully planning his next move, waiting for the right moment to act. One evening, Khalid asked Amina to join him for a drive. He told her he wanted to discuss their marriage, a rare gesture that caught her off guard. Amina, eager to address the growing distance between them, agreed without hesitation. She hoped that this conversation might be an opportunity to bridge the gap between them, to find some semblance of understanding. But as they drove out of the city and into the quiet expanse of the desert, Amina began to sense that something was wrong. The silence in the car was heavy, broken only by the hum of the engine. Khalid's expression was unreadable, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Amina tried to make small talk, but his curt responses only heightened her unease. When they finally stopped at a remote location far from the city lights, Amina's heart began to race. She asked Khalid why they were there, but his only response was to step out of the car and motion for her to follow. As they stood under the vast desert sky, Khalid confronted Amina with the evidence of her affair. He showed her the photos, the messages, and the video, each piece of evidence a dagger to her heart. Amina was stunned, her mind racing as she tried to process what was happening. She knew there was no point in denying the truth, so she admitted to the affair, her voice trembling with fear and regret. Khalid's reaction was explosive. His anger, which had been simmering for weeks, erupted in a torrent of accusations and insults. He berated Amina for betraying him, for dishonoring their family, and for bringing shame upon their name. Amina tried to explain herself, to apologize, but her words only seemed to fuel his rage. In that moment, Khalid was consumed by a sense of humiliation and betrayal so deep that it blinded him to everything else. For Amina, the confrontation was a nightmare. She had always known the risks of her actions, but she had never imagined it would come to this. She pleaded with Khalid to forgive her, to let her make amends, but her words fell on deaf ears. Khalid was beyond reason, his mind set on what he believed was the only way to restore his honor. What happened next was swift and brutal. In the darkness of the desert, far from the eyes of the world, Khalid carried out an act that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. Amina's life was tragically cut short, her dreams and desires silenced in an instant. The woman who had once longed for freedom and love was now a victim of the very traditions and expectations that had shaped her life. Khalid, in his mind, believed he had done what was necessary. He returned home that night, his emotions a mix of anger, sorrow, and a twisted sense of justification. But the weight of his actions would soon catch up with him. Amina's disappearance did not go unnoticed, and the truth would eventually come to light. The next morning, Amina's family reported her missing. They were frantic, unable to reach her and unaware of what had happened. Khalid feigned concern, playing the role of a worried husband. But as the days passed and no sign of Amina emerged, suspicions began to grow. Ryan, devastated by her sudden absence, came forward with their story, risking his own safety to reveal the truth. Ryan's testimony, combined with the evidence he provided, led authorities to Khalid. The investigation was swift, and Khalid was arrested and charged with murder. During his trial, he showed no remorse, claiming that his actions were justified under the principles of honor. His defense sparked outrage and debate, both in the UAE and internationally. Human rights organizations condemned the killing, calling for an end to violence justified in the name of tradition. The court ultimately sentenced Khalid to life in prison, a rare but significant verdict in a region where such cases are often shrouded in silence. For Amina's family, the verdict brought some measure of justice, but it could never erase the pain of losing her. Ryan, unable to cope with the guilt and trauma, returned to the United States, where he struggled to rebuild his life. Amina's story became a symbol of the need for change, a tragic reminder of the dangers of cultural and societal pressures. Her death sparked conversations about women's rights, justice, and the importance of challenging outdated traditions. But for those who knew and loved her, she would always be remembered as a woman who dared to dream of a life beyond the confines of her world, a dream that came at a devastating cost. The aftermath of Amina's tragic death sent shockwaves through her family, her community, and beyond. What had once been a private matter, hidden behind the walls of her home, was now a public scandal that exposed the harsh realities of cultural expectations, gender inequality, and the devastating consequences of honor-based violence. Amina's story became a lightning rod for conversations that many had avoided for far too long. For Amina's family, the loss was unbearable. Her parents, who had always taken pride in their daughter's grace and obedience, were left grappling with the guilt of their own role in her life. They had raised her to prioritize family honor above all else, never imagining that this very value would lead to her death. Her younger siblings, who had looked up to her as a role model, were left questioning the traditions they had been taught to uphold. The family's grief was compounded by the public nature of the case. News of Amina's death and the circumstances surrounding it spread quickly, drawing attention from local and international media. Her parents, once respected members of their community, now found themselves at the center of a storm they could not control. They were forced to confront uncomfortable questions about the values they had instilled in their children and the societal norms they had accepted without question. Despite their pain, Amina's family chose to speak out. In a rare and courageous move, they publicly condemned Khalid's actions and called for justice. They acknowledged the cultural pressures that had shaped their lives but insisted that nothing could justify the taking of an innocent life. Their decision to break their silence was met with both support and criticism, as it challenged deeply ingrained beliefs about family honor and the role of women in society. For Ryan Calloway, Amina's death was a devastating blow. He had come to Dubai seeking adventure and opportunity, never imagining that he would become entangled in a story of love and loss that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Ryan's decision to come forward with the truth about his relationship with Amina was not an easy one. He knew the risks involved, both for himself and for her family, but he felt a moral obligation to ensure that her story was told. Ryan's testimony was instrumental in securing Khalid's conviction, but it came at a personal cost. He faced backlash from some members of the community who viewed him as an outsider who had disrupted the social order. He also struggled with feelings of guilt, questioning whether his actions had ultimately led to Amina's death. Despite these challenges, Ryan remained committed to honoring her memory. He returned to the United States, where he began working with organizations dedicated to raising awareness about honor-based violence and advocating for women's rights. Ryan's journey toward healing was a long and difficult one. He often found himself replaying the moments he had shared with Amina, wondering if there was anything he could have done differently. But over time, he came to understand that the forces that had led to her death were far larger than either of them. Amina's story, he realized, was not just about their relationship, it was about the systemic issues that had shaped her life and ultimately taken it away. Amina's death and the trial that followed sparked intense debate within her community. For some, Khalid's actions were seen as a necessary response to a betrayal that had brought shame upon his family. These individuals argued that Amina had violated the values that held their society together and that Khalid had acted in accordance with tradition. For others, however, her death was a wake-up call, a stark reminder of the need to challenge outdated practices and protect the rights of women. The case also drew attention from international human rights organizations, which used it as an opportunity to highlight the prevalence of honor-based violence around the world. Advocates called for legal reforms to protect women from such violence and to hold perpetrators accountable. They also emphasized the importance of education and awareness campaigns to challenge the cultural norms that perpetuate these practices. In the UAE, the case led to a broader conversation about the role of women in society and the need for greater protections against gender-based violence. While progress was slow, Amina's story became a catalyst for change, inspiring activists and lawmakers to push for reforms. Her name was often invoked in discussions about women's rights, a symbol of both the challenges that remained and the hope for a better future. Amina's story did not end with her death. In the years that followed, her name became synonymous with the fight for justice and equality. Her family, despite their grief, established a foundation in her memory to support women facing similar challenges. The foundation provided resources for victims of domestic violence, advocated for legal reforms, and worked to raise awareness about the dangers of honor-based violence. Ryan, too, played a role in preserving Amina's legacy. He collaborated with the foundation, sharing his story and using his platform to amplify its message. Together, they worked to ensure that Amina's death would not be in vain, that her story would inspire others to challenge the norms and traditions that had claimed her life. Amina's case also had a lasting impact on the legal system in the UAE. While honor-based violence had long been a taboo subject, her death forced lawmakers to confront the issue head-on. New legislation was introduced to strengthen protections for women and to ensure that perpetrators of such violence faced appropriate consequences. While these changes were not without resistance, they marked an important step forward in the fight for gender equality. Amina's life and death serve as a powerful reminder of the complexities of love, tradition, and the human desire for freedom. Her story is not just about one woman's tragic fate, it is about the countless others who face similar struggles in silence. It is a call to action for all of us to challenge the systems and beliefs that perpetuate inequality and to work toward a world where every individual is free to live their life without fear. As we reflect on Amina's story, let us remember her not as a victim but as a symbol of resilience and hope. Let us honor her memory by continuing the fight for justice and equality, by speaking out against violence and oppression, and by supporting those who dare to dream of a better future. If this story moved you, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe to True Crime Stories Arena. Share it with others. Together, we can ensure that Amina's voice is not forgotten and that her legacy continues to inspire change.